Matt slammed the eviction notice on the counter, rage twisting his face. His mother, Helen, sat miles away, barefoot on the beach, smiling at the life they tried to steal. They thought a mother's love meant unlimited forgiveness. Helen taught them what it really meant, limits. She didn't just retire from work, she retired from being their crutch. And when the dust settled, it wasn't the mother left bankrupt, it was the children. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The laughter rolled across the dining room like a wave, loud, thoughtless, drowning. Helen sat quietly at the head of the table, her wine glass untouched, the edges of her smile brittle. They were laughing at her, and they didn't even realize it. The dishes were still warm, the last of the roast chicken and garlic potatoes half eaten, when Helen mentioned it. "I think I'm ready to retire," she said casually, folding her napkin into a neat square on her lap. For a second, silence. Then Chloe snorted into her water glass, trying to stifle a giggle. Matt caught her eye and chuckled too, his fork clinking loudly against his plate as he exaggerated, wiping his mouth. "Retire?" Chloe said, a little too loudly. "Mom, what would you even do? You'd lose your mind without us needing you for everything." Matt leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smiling that easy, careless smile he'd perfected since childhood. "Yeah, come on, Mom. Retire from what? You've been semi-retired for years, living the easy life." Their laughter filled the room again, overlapping, careless. Helen sat perfectly still. The chandelier above them, one she had paid for in installments while Matt was still in college, swung slightly from the air conditioning kicking on. The smell of buttered rolls and lemon pie hung thick in the air. Beneath it all, a sharper scent rose, something metallic and faintly bitter. Resentment. But Helen only smiled. A tight, practiced thing. She passed the salad bowl to Chloe, who didn't notice that Helen's hand lingered a fraction too long before letting go. She glanced around the table, the plates, the furniture, the clothes on their backs, all purchased at least once by the woman they were laughing at now. And they didn't even know. They laughed over a meal she bought, sitting on chairs she financed, inside a home she co-signed into existence. After dinner, Helen busied herself in the kitchen. Alone, as usual. Matt had made a lazy excuse about needing to prep a big meeting. Chloe had flopped on the couch to scroll through Instagram, her fingers flicking fast, her eyes glazed over. Helen scrubbed a pot clean, methodical. She watched the soapy water swirl down the drain like time itself, decades spent boiling down into something unseen. The urge to cry flickered, and died just as fast. Instead, she dried her hands carefully, smoothing invisible creases from the dish towel, and walked into her small office off the hallway. She closed the door softly behind her. No one noticed. They never did. She sat at her desk, the chair creaking a little under her weight. She pulled open the bottom drawer and retrieved an old tablet she kept hidden from the same people who laughed without realizing they were laughing at the only parachute they had ever known. Helen powered it on. The banking app opened immediately. It wasn't the shared family account, not the one Matt dipped into for emergencies that usually looked like trips to Cabo or down payments on luxury cars. This was hers. The screen loaded with a gentle chime, displaying figures that looked frankly like freedom. Not extravagant, but enough. Enough to buy peace. Enough to cut ties. She tapped around, scrolling through the hidden trust funds, the emergency reserves quietly tucked away, the silent safeguards she'd built while they weren't paying attention. Her reflection caught in the black screen as it flickered between apps. She didn't look bitter. She looked ready. Helen smiled again, smaller this time, more real, and whispered under her breath, "Maybe it's time to retire more than just my job." Her thumb hovered over the button. Transfer funds, freeze access, change beneficiaries. With a quiet tap, she opened the first setting. The laughter from the living room trickled down the hallway, muffled by distance. Helen didn't hear it anymore. She was already planning their retirement. They never asked where the money came from. It just appeared, like light switches flipping on or heaters humming in winter. They only noticed something was wrong when the lights began to flicker and the warmth started to vanish. Helen sat at her desk in the dim morning light, tapping her fingertip against the glass screen of her tablet. The banking app glowed quietly, the numbers soothing, steady. Her thumb hovered over the transfer option. Not a full withdrawal yet. No, she would start small. Barely noticeable amounts at first. A quiet erosion, like a tide pulling at the sand beneath a careless castle. She moved $500 into her private trust, then $200, then another $700 a week later. Tiny shifts, ghost withdrawals, not enough to set off alarms. Not yet. She scrolled through the transaction history of the family emergency account, an account she had personally kept alive for over a decade, the one Matt and Chloe leaned on like a crutch they never thought would snap. The entries were insultingly casual. Tulum airfare, Chloe. Matt, electronics world purchase, couples massage package, anniversary gift. Helen's jaw tightened. Her fingers slowed as she scrolled further. Not hospital bills, not job loss emergencies, vacations, spa days, new phones, luxury gym memberships. Each withdrawal was a confession they never spoke aloud. They had never needed her sacrifices. They had expected them. Her mind drifted back, unbidden, to a memory from years ago. Matt, 19, and panicked, standing on her doorstep in the rain, soaked to the skin and shivering. "Mom, I just need a little help, just until payday, I promise." He had looked so desperate, so young. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't even asked how much. Now she wondered if the rain that night had ever been real, or just another scene he learned to play. Later that week, Helen sat in the sterile, wood-scented office of Ms. Geller, her new financial planner. The young woman wore simple pearl earrings and spoke with the calm precision of someone used to steering sinking ships. "You want full asset protection?" Ms. Geller asked, tapping her pen thoughtfully. Helen nodded once. "I want everything rerouted, trusts, private accounts, untouchable by family members." Ms. Geller smiled faintly as if she had heard the word family used like a threat before. "Smart move. Most people wait too long." Helen smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. She signed the papers without hesitation, each signature feeling like a chain snapping off her wrist. By the time she left the office, she no longer just had money, she had armor. That night she sat back at her desk, the room lit only by a single brass lamp. The tablet glowed on the surface, bathing her hands in soft blue light. The family emergency account blinked on the screen. She hovered over the freeze account option, heartbeat steady, breath calm. She thought about every bill she'd paid without thanks, every favor framed as an obligation, every sacrifice folded into expectation. She thought about the laughter at the dinner table. She clicked. Account frozen, no alert sent, no warning given. In the living room, Chloe's laughter carried from the television, some reality show she was half watching while scrolling her phone. Helen closed the office door quietly. The walls muffled the noise, but Helen didn't mind. Let them enjoy the glow while it lasted. They would feel the cold soon enough. Chloe stood at the boutique register, smiling politely, her arms heavy with pastel shopping bags. The clerk swiped her platinum card once, twice. A pause. The small beep of rejection echoed louder than any scream. Chloe's face tightened into a brittle smile. "Can you try it again?" she said, voice syrup-sweet but cracking underneath. The young cashier, barely 20, hair pulled into a tight bun, offered a sympathetic grimace and slid the card again. Declined. "I'm sorry," the girl said quietly. "It's not going through." People behind Chloe began to shuffle impatiently. Someone coughed. The air smelled of overpriced perfume and tension. Chloe's cheeks flushed hot. She yanked out her phone, tapping furiously to check her mobile banking app. Her balance spun in circles, then flashed an ominous error. Account access restricted. The boutique clerk cleared her throat. "If you'd like, we can hold your items for—" "No!" Chloe snapped. It's a glitch. I'll come back." She stormed out of the boutique, heels clacking angrily against the marble floor, bags swinging uselessly at her side. By the time she made it to her car, her fingers were already dialing. Matt answered on the second ring, his voice half distracted. "Hey, babe, what's up?" My card declined, Chloe hissed. At Vera's. In front of everyone. Matt chuckled lightly. Relax. It's probably the bank doing a routine check or something. Chloe slammed the car door shut harder than necessary. Routine checks don't lock me out of my own account, Matt. A beat of silence. You think it's your mom? He asked, voice dropping. Chloe gritted her teeth. Call her. Matt waited until after dinner, when the house was quiet and Helen would be at her most agreeable. He dialed her number, adopting his best polite tone, the one he hadn't used since he was 17 and needed extra gas money. Helen picked up after 3 rings. Hi, Mom, he said, dragging out the warmth. Hope you're doing okay. Listen, tiny thing. There might be a bank glitch. Chloe's card got declined today. Helen's voice came back syrupy and smooth. Oh dear, she said. That sounds stressful. Yeah, real strange, Matt said, forcing a chuckle. I'm sure it's nothing, but, thought you might want to check. A soft pause. Then Helen, still sweet. I'll look into it after my nap. Matt blinked. Your nap? You know how it is, Helen said airily. Retirement life. Very exhausting. Click. She hung up. Matt stared at the phone, stunned. Inside her study, Helen placed her phone down gently and leaned back into the armchair. The late afternoon sun streamed through the curtains, dust motes dancing in the golden light. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She was simply finished. Her mind drifted back to the memory of Matt as a boy, 7 years old, wobbling on his first 2-wheeler in the cul-de-sac. She had jogged behind him, breathless with hope, steadying his balance with one hand until he found it himself. He had turned to her, cheeks flushed with pride, shouting, Look, Mom, I can do it! And she had clapped and laughed and cheered because back then he had still seen her. Back then, gratitude had been pure. Helen smiled faintly now, watching the sun sink lower outside. You outgrew gratitude, she whispered. I outgrew guilt. Meanwhile, in a half-lit living room across town, Chloe sat hunched over her laptop, eyes burning with frustration. Matt paced the room behind her. This isn't right, Chloe said. She can't just freeze accounts without telling us. Matt muttered, Technically, they're not ours. Chloe glared at him. Technicalities don't pay bills. She scrolled furiously, clicking into an old email thread with their family lawyer. Requesting appointment. Topic: Financial rights and power of attorney clarification. She hit send with a sharp jab of her finger. If Helen thought she could pull the plug without consequences, she was about to learn just how ugly family business could get. They sat across the lawyer's desk, smiling like predators in polite clothing. Matt cleared his throat. Chloe squeezed his hand under the table. Helen only smiled back, knowing they thought they were leading the conversation. They didn't realize the signatures they needed had already sealed their fate years ago. The conference room smelled faintly of leather chairs and fresh printer ink. A window buzzed from a cracked seal, letting in the steady hum of traffic outside. Helen sat between Matt and Chloe, a leather-bound folder in her lap, playing her part perfectly. The sweet, confused mother. Across from them, Mr. Klein, the family lawyer, clicked his pen once and leaned forward. So, Chloe began, her voice syrupy smooth, we've been thinking, it's really important to plan ahead, for emergencies, health issues, just to be safe. Matt chimed in, his tone forced light. Yeah, like if you needed someone to handle paperwork if, God forbid, something happened. We just want to be prepared, for your sake. Helen nodded slowly, her hands folded neatly over the folder. And you want? She prompted. Chloe smiled too quickly. A durable power of attorney, she said, sliding a packet across the table. We'd just handle the hard stuff, banking, property decisions, purely practical. Helen lifted the packet with careful fingers. The weight of it felt like a chain. She skimmed the highlighted sections. Matt and Chloe had done their homework, pre-filled, pre-planned. Their names already typed where signatures would go. Helen traced a finger over her name. Helen Monroe. Still hers. For now. She looked up, face serene. This is a lot to digest, she said gently. I'll need time to think. Chloe's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, but she masked it quickly. Of course, she said. Take all the time you need. Matt offered a strained laugh. Not too long, though, just in case. Helen smiled warmly at them both. Of course. That evening, the sunset painted the house in gold and violet. Helen moved slowly, methodically, through the hall closet, pulling down old boxes, thick with dust and memories. She found it buried beneath stacks of old tax records, a plain manila envelope, inside, original deeds, purchase agreements, bank statements, Matt's house. A decade ago, he couldn't qualify for a mortgage on his own. Helen had co-signed without hesitation, without protection, because back then, loyalty hadn't felt like a risk. She unfolded the original contract carefully, the paper crinkling like brittle autumn leaves. Her name, right there, right beside his. Co-owner, legally binding, controlling interest. They had forgotten, or maybe assumed, her signature meant permission. They didn't realize it meant control. Helen spent the next hour updating her will quietly, methodically. She logged into her private legal portal and rerouted inheritances. Matt and Chloe's names disappeared, replaced with the names of two nieces Helen hadn't spoken to in years, but who had once called her Auntie Helen, and meant it. She uploaded the scanned house documents. She confirmed her new healthcare proxy, someone unbiased, untouchable by guilt or manipulation. It wasn't anger fueling her fingers. It was precision, the slow, careful reclaiming of a life handed over too easily. Later, Helen sat by the fireplace with a cup of mint tea, listening to the quiet tick of the clock. Her phone buzzed. Email alert. New activity detected. Loan application. Attempted. Helen opened it casually, already knowing. Chloe's name stared back at her from the application attempt. An online mortgage portal, flagged because Chloe had listed Helen as a co-signer without authorization. Helen chuckled softly to herself, a dry, almost affectionate sound. They still thought they could write her name onto things as if she wasn't paying attention. They hadn't noticed she was already writing them out of her life. Helen always thought betrayal would arrive with a bang. Instead, it came disguised as paperwork. Neat lines, false signatures, hidden behind her own last name. They didn't steal from her openly. They buried the theft inside the trust she once gifted them. Helen sat at her desk, reviewing her flagged account alerts with a clinical eye. The mortgage application attempt had triggered something deeper, a hidden web of activity tangled beneath her old co-signed assets. She clicked through the digital notifications, each one unfolding a new betrayal. Matt and Chloe had listed Helen as an inactive co-owner on not one, but two new mortgage filings. Their goal was clear: refinance their debts against property Helen had already helped them secure, property she technically still partially owned. In their minds, she was a rubber stamp, an invisible name on invisible paper. Helen's hand hovered over the mouse, the faint buzz of the old desk lamp filling the silence. She could feel it, something sharp and final threading through her veins. Not rage, not heartbreak, clarity. They thought she had no use for money anymore. But the truth was simpler. She had no use for them. By noon, she had filed the first report, quietly, methodically, with her financial institution's fraud department. Possible identity misuse, she wrote. Unauthorized asset leverage attempts. Request immediate monitoring of all linked Social Security numbers. By 2:00, she canceled every credit card tied to her name: personal, business, emergency. Chloe's pending purchase for VIP concert seats was instantly denied. By sunset, Helen's financial footprint had shrunk into something beautiful, invisible, untouchable, untraceable. Across town, Chloe's tantrum exploded like fireworks no one had asked for. At a brunch with friends, she slammed her mimosa glass down, splashing sticky orange across the white linen. "Can you believe my own mother is withholding access?" Chloe hissed. "After everything we've done for her?" Her friends exchanged awkward glances. One stirred her coffee too intently. "Isn't it her money?" Someone ventured carefully. Chloe waved her hand dismissively. "Technicality. Family doesn't nickel and dime family." No one responded. The clink of cutlery and whispered side conversations filled the awkward air, but Chloe didn't notice. She was too busy texting Matt furiously under the table. Handle it before she ruins everything. Helen, meanwhile, stood in front of her mirror, holding a simple suitcase. Inside, 2 sundresses, a sun hat, sandals, and a worn paperback she hadn't had time to finish in years. She ran a comb through her silver-streaked hair, applied a soft pink lipstick, and tied a scarf around her neck. No announcement, no farewell speech, no guilt. She booked a luxury cruise, an ocean view balcony suite, for a full month, using only her private trust funds. The email confirmation popped up on her phone. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Helen Monroe. Bon voyage." Helen smiled. For the first time in decades, her journey would not begin with permission slips or guilt payments. It would begin with freedom. Before she left, Helen sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a blank postcard. She wrote slowly, the words forming like the tides outside the cruise ship she hadn't yet boarded. "Enjoy your bills. I'm enjoying my balcony view." No signature, just a crisp, final punctuation to a chapter she had already decided would not be rewritten. She dropped the postcard into the mailbox at the end of her driveway, casual, unhurried, as if mailing a birthday card. Then she turned her back on the house that had once held her hostage with invisible chains of obligation. On board the ship later that evening, Helen stood at the railing as the horn sounded, a low, powerful groan that vibrated through her bones. The city lights faded behind her. The ocean opened ahead. She sipped a glass of champagne, leaned into the salt, sweet breeze, and closed her eyes. Back home somewhere, Chloe would be receiving her little gift. But Helen wasn't there to see the tantrum. She was busy watching the horizon stretch, out before her, wide, endless, and finally her own. It happened faster than they could spin the excuses. One day, their world spun like always, free drinks, upgraded flights, endless handouts. The next, it cracked open at their feet. Smiles turned stiff, credit lines turned cold. And Helen? She didn't lift a finger. She was too busy dancing under foreign stars. Matt stood in the office parking lot, hands on his hips, watching 2 men in navy blue uniforms clamp tow bars onto his company car. The repo agent barely looked at him. "You're 3 months behind on the co-signed business lease," the man said, handing Matt a folded copy of the default notice. Matt's name, Helen's name, both crossed in sharp black ink. "But I thought," Matt stammered, cheeks burning in public humiliation. The agent shrugged. "Not my problem, sir. Call your bank." The SUV jolted as it was hauled onto the flatbed truck, glossy black paint flashing under the noon sun. Across town, Chloe's morning wasn't faring any better. She stood at the reception desk of her elite gym, clutching her monogrammed tote bag, face growing hotter by the second. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the receptionist said, awkward but firm. "Your automatic payments declined. Your membership has been terminated until resolved." Chloe laughed, sharp and fake. "There must be some mistake. I'll just use a different card." The receptionist's smile tightened. "Unfortunately, you are on a special account, linked to a cosigner. That account's been frozen." A few heads turned. Someone behind Chloe smirked. It hit her then, really hit her, that whatever financial scaffolding they'd been leaning on had been sawed through. Helen. Matt called first, straight to voicemail. Then Chloe tried, twice, 3 times, still nothing. She sent a text. "Mom, call us ASAP. There's a huge problem." No read receipt, no little typing dots, no explanation. Helen wasn't just unreachable, she was untouchable. Somewhere far from their panicked calls, Helen stood barefoot on the polished deck of a ship, gliding through dark velvet waters. The ocean breeze carried music from the live band, low jazz, sweet violin strains woven into the night. Helen laughed lightly as an older gentleman spun her gently under the strings of fairy lights, the hem of her simple navy dress swirling around her knees. The stars above seemed endless, unbothered by broken credit cards and frozen assets. When the song ended, Helen curtsied playfully, cheeks flushed not from wine but from sheer, childlike joy. She returned to the railing, slipped off her heels, and let the cool wood press against her bare feet. Her phone buzzed inside her clutch. One glance at the screen told her everything. Bank alert, legal attempt detected, parental financial neglect, Complaint filed. Helen's smile didn't falter. She slipped the phone back into her purse without opening the message. She had missed many things over the years: vacations, weekends, small dreams shelved in favor of someone else's emergencies. One in particular floated back now, vivid as salt air. 15 years ago. A dream trip to Greece. Sun-drenched villas and blue-domed churches she had circled in travel brochures, canceled overnight because Matt needed an urgent cash infusion for his wedding. "You'll have other chances, Mom," he had said then, clapping her shoulder like a coach subbing out a player. But chances weren't endless. And Helen had learned that lesson better than anyone. Now, she moved through the world without permission slips or second guesses. And when the violin struck up again, she was already dancing back into the night, light as air. You can hear it in the courtroom, the slow crack of arrogance breaking apart. It's not loud. It's not even dramatic. It's a whisper at first, then a gasp, then a silence so deep it swallows the ones who thought they could win. Chloe was about to learn, you can't sue someone who already set herself free. Helen sat at the polished mahogany table in a modest but merciless courtroom, hands folded lightly in her lap. Across from her, Chloe sat stiff-backed beside her lawyer, a young man in a sharp navy suit who already looked nervous. The judge, a woman in her 50s, steel-gray hair pulled into a bun, glanced through the preliminary files with a slight frown. The overhead fans whispered above them, slicing the heavy Florida air into slow-moving currents. Ms. Geller, Helen's attorney, stood confidently, barely glancing at the papers she held. "Your Honor," Ms. Geller began smoothly, "the plaintiff is attempting to claim financial neglect. However, the plaintiff is 35 years old. She has been financially independent, by law, since her 21st birthday, and certainly by her 30th. The judge nodded slowly, waiting. Ms. Geller turned slightly toward Helen without theatrical flair, simply presenting the facts. "Helen Monroe has no standing legal obligation to support her adult daughter financially. In fact," she added, tapping the file once for emphasis, "all of Ms. Monroe's assets have been legally protected for years: a private trust, isolated pension, and notarized estate planning, all verified before these proceedings." She handed over the neatly organized folders with a soft snap. Chloe's lawyer rose, trying to counter. "Your Honor, we contend there was an implied dependency, an established pattern of financial support." The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. "Implied dependency is not recognized in this court for adult children." Her voice was crisp, her eyes unimpressed. "And certainly not when the alleged victim attempted mortgage fraud against the alleged abuser." Chloe's face flushed red. Matt shifted uncomfortably beside her, his hands twitching in his lap. The courtroom air thickened, hot, heavy, irreversible. Helen didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She sat still, breathing in the subtle scent of old wood and worn carpet, feeling the invisible, decades-old debts evaporate into nothing. This wasn't about punishment. It was about release. Later that afternoon, Helen boarded the ship again, her shoes clicking softly against the deck. As the ocean swallowed the last hints of shore behind them, a group of women she had met on board, a lively collection of retired teachers and nurses, threw an impromptu early retirement party in her honor. Laughter floated into the salt air. Someone handed her a cupcake, tiny and pink, with a sparkler sticking out of it like a victorious flag. Helen blew it out with one soft breath, wishing for nothing she didn't already have. Freedom didn't need more candles. It just needed space. That night, Helen wandered into the ship's boutique under soft, glowing lights. She didn't need anything, but she stopped at a jewelry case, drawn to a simple necklace, a silver pendant shaped like a small open door. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was just possibility. She bought it without hesitation. The clerk wrapped it carefully, and Helen slipped the box into her purse as if carrying a secret only she understood. Her first real luxury gift to herself. No guilt, no second thoughts, no permission needed. Later, sitting on her balcony with a book in her lap and the moon drenching the ocean in silver, her phone buzzed once. A text from Ms. Geller. They're getting desperate. Expect a surprise. Helen didn't flinch. She sipped her tea, the steam curling against the cool night air, and smiled softly. Desperation wasn't something to fear. It was just the sound of a drowning past gasping for air, and Helen had already learned how to swim without them. You can tell when someone's apology is real. It sounds different. It breathes differently. Real apologies bleed. Fake ones knock politely, holding flowers bought on clearance. And when you open the door, they smile like nothing ever happened. Helen knew the difference before she even turned the handle. The porch lights flickered on automatically as Helen pulled into the driveway. Her home, calm, tidy, untouched, looked exactly the way she had left it. Only one thing was out of place. Matt. He stood stiffly by the front door, a grocery store bouquet clutched awkwardly in both hands. The flowers were half wilted, the plastic wrap crinkling under his sweaty fingers. Behind him, Chloe sat in their dented SUV, her head bowed over her phone, thumbs flying in furious bursts. Helen cut the engine and sat quietly for a beat, breathing in the crisp evening air. There was no anger in her chest, only distance. Matt brightened when he saw her step out. "Mom!" he called out, walking briskly across the driveway. I didn't know when you'd get back. Thought I'd wait." Helen said nothing, keys jingling lightly as she approached the door. He fell into step beside her, the flowers between them like a peace offering too cheap to matter. "I just wanted to talk," Matt said quickly, voice shaking slightly. I know we messed up. I know Chloe pushed things too far. I miss you, Mom." Helen turned the key, the deadbolt clicking with a clean finality. She pushed the door open but didn't invite him in. Matt hesitated, shifting the bouquet from hand to hand. "I mean, maybe we can fix things? We're still family, right?" Helen met his eyes fully for the first time. There was real emotion there. Panic, regret, a desperate hunger to rewind time. But under it, too carefully hidden to fool her, was calculation. Matt didn't miss her. He missed the safety net he thought she'd always be. Inside the car, Chloe slammed her hand against the dashboard and typed another venomous post. Some people forget who took care of them. Family drama, ungrateful. Her fingers flew, tagging mutual friends, painting herself the victim. Because if the truth didn't fit, Chloe would simply manufacture a louder version. Back on the porch, Matt cleared his throat awkwardly. "I even wrote you a letter," he said, fishing a folded paper from his back pocket. "Just something to say sorry." Helen accepted it without a word. She stepped inside, closing the door firmly between them before he could say anything else. Through the frosted glass, she watched his silhouette linger for a second. Then, defeated, he trudged back toward the car. The SUV peeled out faster than necessary, tires scraping the curb as it disappeared down the street. Helen locked the door behind her. She leaned against it, the cool wood solid against her spine, and unfolded the letter. The words blurred together, apologies mixed with veiled guilt trips, lines about what family owes each other, promises that smelled more like demands. Helen smiled sadly. Then she carried the letter to the kitchen, fed it into her shredder, and watched it dissolve into unrecognizable confetti. Later that night, curled up in her favorite reading chair, a soft chime echoed from her phone. A notification. Helen picked it up, her heart steady. On the screen, Chloe Andrews posted a new story. Helen opened it without hesitation. "Some mothers abandon you when you need them most. Toxic family. Solder truth hurts." Underneath was a photo, an old family shot Helen hadn't even remembered posing for, cropped so she looked distant, almost cruel. A curated villain, a tailor-made martyrdom. Helen set the phone down gently on the side table. No reply needed. Some battles are lost the second you start arguing with a liar. It's easy to rewrite history when you think no one kept the receipts. Chloe posted a lie dressed in a sob story, sure the world would believe her. But Helen didn't argue. She didn't rage. She simply opened a folder labeled Proof and started printing. The post went live just after midnight. Helen found it the next morning, sipping her coffee in the soft light of her kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only other sound. Chloe's words stared back at her from the phone screen. Some elderly parents can't handle losing control. Sad to watch them spiral into bitterness after a lifetime of love and support. Family first. Pray for healing. The photo attached was worse. An old snapshot of Helen, cropped tight to show a frown mid-conversation, probably mid-sneeze, Helen thought dryly. It painted her as cold, angry, unreachable. The comments had already begun stacking up. "Sending you love, Chloe. You're so strong. Toxic parents are the worst. Prayers up, stay positive." Helen scrolled slowly, unmoved. Truth didn't panic. Truth waited. By noon, Chloe's follow-up post dropped like gasoline onto dry leaves. After everything we did for her, support, care, kindness, she turned on us. Elderly woman, now broke and angry, blaming family for her failures. Helen set her phone down with a quiet click. She walked to the small filing cabinet she kept tucked behind the living room bookshelf, hidden, forgotten. The lock clicked open. Inside, a lifetime's worth of careful record-keeping. Bank transfers, property deeds, emails with timestamps, mortgage payment records in Helen's name, payments that had kept Matt and Chloe housed for years. Every dollar, every signature, every silent rescue they had long since rewritten as obligation. She laid them out across the kitchen table under the soft hum of the overhead light. The documents fluttered slightly under the fan, thin and razor-sharp as knives. Her mind slipped backward for a moment, to a younger Matt, maybe 11 years old, slumped at the kitchen table struggling over an English essay. "Always tell the truth, Maddie," she had coached gently. "Tell it clean. Tell it plain. It's the only story that doesn't fall apart later." She remembered the pride in his eyes when he got an A on that paper. She remembered thinking she had taught him something permanent. She was wrong. Helen gathered the papers methodically into 2 folders. Receipts, timeline. She opened her laptop, attached the evidence into a clean, unassailable file, and drafted a quiet, lethal email. Not to Chloe, not to Matt, to her lawyer. Subject line: defamation filing, request for immediate action. She hit send with no ceremony. The hum of the dishwasher kicked on behind her, low and steady. The world outside her window was brilliant with spring, green and stubborn and alive. Helen smiled faintly. Let Chloe enjoy her temporary likes, her plastic sympathy. Because real courtrooms didn't run on hashtags, they ran on proof. The following afternoon, Helen walked into a local FedEx office, documents tucked under her arm, scent of fresh paper and toner thick in the air. "How can I help you today?" the clerk asked with a bright smile. Helen placed the manila envelope on the counter. "I need these filed overnight to the county clerk's office." The woman tapped rapidly on the keyboard. "Filing for a hearing?" Helen nodded once. "Defamation." There was a small pause, long enough for the clerk to glance at Helen with fresh respect. "Good for you," she said under her breath, sliding the label across the counter. Helen only smiled. Back home, Helen placed her phone face down on the counter. If Chloe posted another story, she wouldn't see it. If Matt sent a carefully worded apology, she wouldn't hear it. The only thing she needed now was patience, because Chloe had declared war on fiction, and Helen had declared victory with facts. You don't argue with liars. You don't roll in the dirt they kick up around themselves. You wait, you build your case, and you hold up a mirror so sharp it cuts without you lifting a single finger. Helen didn't show up to defend herself that day. She showed up to let the truth bleed them dry, and when it did, she didn't even blink. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a solemn sort of silence draping over the rows of benches. Helen walked in slowly, her simple navy suit pressed and spotless, a thin folder tucked beneath her arm. Her sunglasses came off as she reached her seat, revealing eyes that weren't angry or scared. They were clear, dangerously clear. Across the aisle, Matt slumped low in his chair, tapping his foot with anxious energy he couldn't contain. Beside him, Chloe sat ramrod straight, her arms folded tightly, her face pulled into a mask of wounded dignity. Only the trembling of her jaw betrayed her. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with a sharp jawline and sharper eyes, called the room to order. The clerk read out the case. Helen Monroe versus Chloe Andrews. Defamation, seeking damages for public misrepresentation and reputational harm. Helen sat still, letting Ms. Geller do what she did best. Ms. Geller rose, smooth and composed, and began speaking with the calm authority of someone who knew the ending before the story even started. "Your Honor," she said, handing over a neatly organized binder. "This is not a case built on speculation. It's built on records, proof, years of verifiable financial support provided by Ms. Monroe to her adult children, well beyond any legal obligation." The judge flipped through the binder, her face unreadable. Inside were bank ledgers showing Helen's steady deposits into Matt's accounts, property deeds listing her as co-signer, chat transcripts of Chloe asking for money under the guise of family emergencies, vacations, jewelry, cars. Ms. Geller continued without fanfare. Meanwhile, the plaintiff, Ms. Chloe Andrews, publicly and repeatedly accused Ms. Monroe of abandonment, financial negligence, and abuse, none of which is supported by any legal or factual evidence. Across the courtroom, Chloe's lawyer shifted nervously. The judge raised an eyebrow, glancing over the highlighted social media posts. The dates and times matched perfectly against the financial support Helen had quietly and consistently provided. Chloe's lawyer tried to push back, mumbling about implied support and family expectations, but the judge shut him down with a single raised hand. "In this court," she said firmly, "expectations are not evidence. Obligations end at adulthood. Ms. Monroe provided out of generosity, not necessity." A murmur rippled through the few spectators sitting in the gallery. Matt turned red, ducking his head. Chloe's nostrils flared as she leaned in to whisper furiously to her attorney. The judge sighed heavily and brought her gavel down with a loud, satisfying crack. Judgment awarded to the defendant. Damages set at a nominal figure, but let the record show, Ms. Monroe's name is legally cleared. The finality of the moment hit like a physical blow. Chloe surged to her feet, knocking her chair backward. "This isn't over!" she hissed, voice cracking with rage and something that sounded dangerously like panic. Matt stayed seated, frozen, his face pale and expressionless. Helen didn't turn to look at them. She didn't need to. She gathered her folder, lifted her chin, and walked down the center aisle, straight-backed, steady, out into the bright sunlight. The steps outside the courthouse gleamed under a perfect blue sky. Helen slid her sunglasses back on, breathing in deeply. The air smelled sweeter than it had in years. Ms. Geller joined her at the bottom of the steps, a rare smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "You know," she said lightly, tucking a few papers under her arm, "some publishers have been asking about you." Helen arched an eyebrow, amused. "Publishers?" Ms. Geller nodded. "They're looking for real stories, stories about strength, about choosing yourself. Yours would sell." Helen laughed softly, genuine and free. Maybe she had lost a family once, but maybe she had found something far rarer in its place, herself. They had tried to sell her story without asking, painted her as bitter, broken, invisible. Helen didn't argue. She didn't correct them. She simply wrote her own story instead, raw, sharp, and anonymous. And when the world finally listened, it wasn't their names people whispered about anymore. It was hers. The idea came not in a rush, but like a tide, slowly rising around Helen's ankles. After the courtroom victory, Ms. Geller introduced her to a quiet literary agent, a woman who specialized in anonymous nonfiction for forgotten voices, those whose stories were too real, too raw for polite TV segments. At first, Helen hesitated. Wasn't silence enough? Hadn't she already won by walking away? But as she sat one afternoon on the sun-drenched balcony of her rented beach condo, watching the gulls ride the salt-heavy wind, she realized something. Winning wasn't enough. They had screamed their version into the world. She wanted to tell the truth, clean, pure, and untraceable, just once. The memoir wasn't flashy, it wasn't vengeful, it was precise. Every chapter bled honesty. The invisible years, the quiet sacrifices disguised as what mothers do, the casual erasure at every holiday gathering, the slow erosion of self-esteem disguised as helping. Helen wrote at night, the words pouring out in clean, sharp lines filling page after page. She never named Chloe or Matt directly. She didn't have to. Truth recognizes itself even when you change the names. The book was released quietly. No fanfare, no Oprah interviews, no book tours. Just a small indie press, a simple gray cover, and a title that felt like a whisper with a knife behind it. Unpaid dues, the cost of loving the ungrateful. At first, nothing happened. Then the forums picked it up. Online spaces for estranged parents, for caregivers abandoned after years of quiet service, for mothers and fathers who had given everything and been rewarded with silence or contempt. The posts flooded in. This is my life. Every word. I thought I was crazy until now. I cried through the last chapter. She wrote my pain. Within 6 weeks, the ebook sales spiked, paperback orders doubled. A few small podcasts requested anonymous interviews, which Helen politely declined. She didn't need to explain herself to strangers anymore. Meanwhile, Chloe's online presence began to unravel. Old friends unfollowed. New influencer sponsorships quietly disappeared. Every time Chloe posted a vague, inspirational quote about boundaries and healing, comment sections filled with thinly veiled references to the book. Someone even tagged her once, accidentally or on purpose, with the line, "Funny how villains always think they're victims." Matt, for his part, stayed silent. Helen imagined he was smart enough to know when the tides had turned and that swimming harder wouldn't save him. With the steady trickle of royalties flowing into her account, Helen made one last quiet move. She found a cozy beach house 3 towns over, small, 2 bedrooms, but with wide windows that drank in the ocean and a porch that felt like it belonged to someone finally at peace. She paid for it in cash. No mortgages, no co-signers, no chains, just a deed with her name alone. Helen sat on the new porch one evening, the sea air lifting strands of her silver hair, a glass of wine resting on the arm of her chair. No regrets, no noise, no ghosts knocking anymore. That night, as she was closing her laptop, a soft ping sounded from her inbox. An email. From Matthew. Subject, "I miss you, Mom." Helen stared at it for a long moment, the cursor blinking steadily beside the unread line. She didn't open it. Not yet. Some bridges don't need burning. They collapse on their own under the weight of what was never real. She closed the laptop, leaned back into her chair, and let the sound of the waves fill the quiet spaces they had once occupied. Not every unanswered message is a mistake. Some are deliberate. Some are a mirror, held up silently to the sender, forcing them to sit alone with the echo of their own choices. Helen didn't delete Matt's email. She didn't block him either. She simply read it and then chose herself. The next morning, the sky over Helen's beach house was painted in soft brushstrokes of rose and gold. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, the ocean breeze pushing through the open windows, carrying the salty tang of the sea. On the kitchen counter, her laptop glowed quietly. The email notification still sat there, bold and waiting. From Matt Andrews. Subject, "I miss you, Mom." Helen sipped her tea, feeling the weight, or perhaps the lack of it, settle in her chest. Slowly, deliberately, she clicked it open. The message was short. "I know we made mistakes. I know we hurt you. I just want to start over. Please call me. I miss you." No apologies for the years, no acknowledgement of the damage, no real ownership, just the kind of desperate words people sent when they realized the ATM wasn't coming back online. Helen read it once, then again, and then she smiled, a soft, bittersweet thing, and closed the tab. She didn't hit reply. She didn't block him. She left the email exactly where it was, a monument to everything she had finally outgrown. Later that afternoon, she printed the email on a single sheet of heavy cream paper. No edits. No commentary. She found an old wooden frame at a thrift store nearby, weathered and worn smooth by hands she'd never know, and slipped the printout inside. She hung it by the front door of her beach house. Above it, in small, etched letters on the frame, she carved the words herself. "Absence teaches more than presence ever could." It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. The kind she had waited decades to find. Helen didn't waste another breath chasing what had already walked away. Instead, she chased new things. At 68, she signed up for surfing lessons, something she had always dreamed of but had been told, gently and patronizingly, was unrealistic for someone her age. The first day she wobbled on the board, falling spectacularly into the surf. She laughed so hard she startled the instructor. "Most people get frustrated," he said, grinning. Helen shook water from her hair, beaming. "I spent too long staying dry for everyone else. I'm ready to fall." And stand. And fall again. And she did. Over and over, until one day she caught a small, perfect wave and rode it all the way to shore, cheering like a woman reborn. Helen also joined a local mentoring group, women over 60 teaching financial independence to newly divorced or widowed seniors. The meetings were small at first, a few wary women, their faces lined with worry and years of invisibility. Helen stood up one evening in the small community center room, holding nothing but her own quiet certainty. "You don't have to wait for someone to validate your worth," she said. "You don't have to ask for permission to have peace." They listened, and slowly, week by week, their shoulders squared a little more, their laughter returned, their worlds reopened. It wasn't about revenge. It was about repair. One evening, after a long day on the beach and a sunset mentoring session, Helen returned home, humming under her breath. Her phone buzzed once on the entry table, a news alert. She picked it up, expecting another weather warning or local event. Instead, the headline made her pause. "Influencer Chloe Andrews declares bankruptcy after defamation settlement fallout." Helen stared at the screen, feeling no victory, no gloating rush of satisfaction, only a quiet, inevitable sense of balance settling into place. You can only outrun the truth for so long before it bills you, with interest. Helen set the phone down gently. Outside her window, the ocean murmured against the sand, endless and forgiving. She stepped outside onto her porch, the warm wood creaking under her bare feet, and tilted her face up to the stars. Free. Finally, fully free. Some debts don't send warning letters. They wait, silent and patient, growing heavier with time. And when the moment comes, they don't knock politely, they kick the door in. Matt and Chloe thought they had inherited a future they didn't pay for. What they didn't know was that the house they stood so proudly inside still had Helen's name written all over its bones. Helen sat at her small kitchen table, the familiar creak of the wooden chair grounding her as she flipped through old file folders. She hadn't looked at the house documents in years. Back then, it had seemed like such a small thing, helping Matt qualify for a mortgage, a final parental sacrifice wrapped in signatures and blind trust. Helen had believed it was an investment in her son's future. What she hadn't realized was that she was signing her own invisibility at the same time. Now, as she read through the fine print, she smiled. Not bitterly, cleanly. The paperwork was simple. Matt had never finished the transfer of ownership. Her name still legally bound to 48% of the property, meaning, by law, she was still a co-owner, meaning, by law, she could force a sale. And that's exactly what she intended to do. Helen slid the papers into a fresh envelope and drove into town, the salt air rushing through the open windows of her old sedan. The county clerk's office smelled faintly of toner and dusty carpet, but Helen barely noticed. She filed the partition action with a steady hand and a heart as light as sea foam. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Just the clean, precise fulfillment of a lesson they had taught her. You can't steal from someone who never stopped keeping the receipts. The notice hit Matt's mailbox 2 weeks later. Helen pictured it arriving in the same hand that had once scribbled birthday cards she slipped into his lunchbox. Only now it carried a different message. Forced sale. Matt's angry, rambling texts went unanswered. So did Chloe's shrill voicemails, stuffed with threats disguised as pleas. The court sided with Helen quickly. Partition sales were a right, not a request. The house was listed, then auctioned. A pale blue two-story with the aging maple tree Helen had planted herself the year Matt turned 10. Gone. The final sale closed at $460,000. After debts, commissions, and fees, Helen claimed her 48% cleanly, nearly $180,000 wired, directly into her personal account. Matt and Chloe were left scrambling. No home, no plan, no magic lifeline to pull from anymore. They moved into a cramped, two-bedroom apartment off a service road, a place so small you could hear the neighbors sneeze through the walls. Helen never gloated. Instead, she made a quiet call to a women's housing shelter she had recently partnered with, an anonymous donation, enough to cover 2 new family units for mothers fleeing financial abuse. It felt better than any revenge, because building something was always better than breaking things, especially when you built it from the ruins they handed you. A few days later, Helen was reading a book on her porch when her phone buzzed. A new post from Chloe. She almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity won out. On the screen, Chloe's latest outburst. "Old people ruined our generation, took everything and left us with nothing. Boomer problems. No future." The words were laced with fury, the edges fraying with desperation. Helen closed the app quietly and set the phone aside. She didn't need to answer. The world had already learned the difference between a sob story and the truth told in court. Some inheritances are earned, some debts are collected, and some houses don't cry when you leave them behind. They laugh. Real celebrations don't need noise. They don't need clinking glasses or roaring crowds. Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones witnessed by the ocean, the stars, and the heart that refused to break. Helen's 69th birthday didn't come with fanfare. It came with freedom, bought, paid for, and finally, fully hers. The sky blushed pink and gold as the sun dipped lower toward the endless stretch of ocean. On the soft white sands outside her beach house, Helen sat with a small circle of friends, women she had met through her mentoring group, survivors and rebuilders all. There were no balloons, no gaudy banners, only a weathered picnic table dressed in simple linen, small plates of lemon bars and shrimp skewers, and glasses of crisp white wine sweating in the salty air. The laughter that floated up was easy, unforced. No one demanded anything here. No one expected her to save them. Helen leaned back in her chair, letting the sunset burn its colors into her memory. This was her gift to herself. Not the party, not the food, not the cake, the permission, the peace. After the small group toasted quietly to her health, Helen pulled a small velvet box from her pocket. She opened it slowly, savoring the moment. Inside lay a simple silver pendant on a delicate chain. Etched into the surface in clean, flowing script were 2 words: "Freedom bought." Helen smiled as she fastened the chain around her neck, feeling the cool kiss of the metal against her skin, a tangible reminder of every hard decision, every boundary held, every door she had closed, and every window that had swung wide open afterward. The waves rolled in, whispering over the sand like the earth's oldest lullaby. Helen walked to the shoreline barefoot, the wet sand squeezing between her toes, the surf brushing against her ankles. She raised her wine glass slightly toward the horizon, as if toasting something unseen, and took a slow sip. The salty breeze tangled through her hair, and somewhere deep inside her chest, something that had been tight for years finally, mercifully, loosened. She thought about the things she had given up once, the Christmas mornings spent waiting for calls that never came, the birthdays forgotten, the hospital visits made alone. Flashes of the past flickered through her mind like an old film reel. Matt's soccer games she never missed. Chloe's college tuition checks signed without hesitation. Vacation brochures tucked away in drawers, gathering dust. All those tiny heartbreaks, all those silent sacrifices. She exhaled, slow and sure, gone. Not forgotten, but no longer heavy. They had been lessons, not losses. Back at the table, her phone buzzed against the wood, the screen lighting up the darkening dusk. An email notification. She picked it up, scanning the subject line. Invitation. Women's Financial Empowerment Forum. Keynote speaker request. Helen blinked once, then laughed quietly to herself. They wanted her to stand on a stage, to tell her story, to show other women how to untangle themselves from invisible chains. Not a cry for sympathy, not a campaign for pity, a blueprint for freedom. She didn't answer right away. She set the phone down gently beside her wine glass and watched the last sliver of the sun slip beneath the water. The sky melted into indigo, and stars began pinpricking the darkness above. Around her, her new friends chatted easily, passing plates and stories, untouched by the noise and chaos she had once thought unavoidable. Helen smiled, soft, certain. This time, she would answer no one, not out of anger, but out of the deep, quiet joy of belonging wholly to herself. They thought retirement meant slowing down, becoming smaller, fading quietly into the corners of life. But Helen had retired from more than a job. She had retired from every chain disguised as love, every demand masquerading as duty. And in shedding them, she hadn't become smaller. She had become unstoppable. The morning after her birthday, Helen sat at her kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the open windows, the scent of salt water heavy in the air. Before her lay her travel journal, its leather cover soft and worn from months of being tucked into backpacks, beach bags, and hotel room nightstands. She flipped it open, running her fingers over the filled pages. Venice canals, hiking trails in Montana, surf lessons scrawled between recipes she'd learned in a tiny kitchen in Tuscany. Each page was a life she had once believed was out of reach. Each inked line a declaration: I lived, I chose, I mattered. There were no blank spaces anymore. Not in the journal. Not in her days. Not in her heart. Helen sipped her coffee slowly, the ceramic mug warm between her palms. She thought about all the things she had once carried without question. The last-minute babysitting emergencies. The birthday dinners that turned into complaints about how she owed them more. The subtle, crushing comments about how she was nothing without her role in their lives. She thought about the years where her love had been measured in wire transfers, in sacrifice, in silence, and she realized none of it had broken her. It had forged her. Outside, the waves murmured against the shore, endless and patient. Helen stood, tying her soft gray sweater around her waist, and stepped barefoot onto the path leading to the beach. The sand was cool beneath her feet at first, then warming as the sun rose higher, golden and alive. She walked slowly at first, savoring the crunch of dry shells underfoot, the sharp tang of the ocean, the cry of gulls overhead. With every step, she let more of the past fall away. The Christmas mornings she had spent waiting for a call that never came. The hospital bed she had sat beside alone after her surgery. The vacations canceled, the dreams shelved, the love given freely and devoured without thanks. All of it, scattered like footprints behind her, erased by the tide. Further down the beach, a family played at the shoreline, laughter rising over the crash of the surf. Helen smiled, not with envy, not with sadness, but with a quiet, fierce kind of hope. Some families healed, some didn't. But peace wasn't something anyone handed you. It was something you bought with hard choices, paid for with boundaries, and protected with a stubborn, unwavering love for yourself. As she reached the curve where the beach met the rocky cliffs, Helen paused. The ocean stretched out endlessly before her, a wild, fearless thing. Much like herself now. She closed her eyes and breathed it in, the salt, the sun, the freedom. And then, with deliberate, unhurried steps, she walked into the future she had crafted with her own 2 hands. Not fragile, not lost, whole. In her travel journal, tucked between the pages, a final entry waited. They laughed at my retirement dreams. I retired them from my life instead. They thought I needed their permission. I needed only my own. Helen smiled as the wind caught the edges of the journal, flipping it closed softly, like the end of a chapter long overdue. Barefoot, windswept, unstoppable, Helen disappeared into the glittering horizon, every step forward a quiet revolution. She hadn't just retired from a job, she had retired from the invisible debts, from the unspoken servitude, from the hollow expectation that she would always stay small to make others feel bigger. She hadn't just found freedom, she had earned it. And as the tide rolled in behind her, wiping away the past, one final truth remained. They laughed at my retirement. I made sure they were the ones left bankrupt, inside and out.